Welcome to a discussion on tribes in India. All societies are evolved around certain collectivities. However, none of these societies or these collectivities are isolated and static. The interactive social processes, the institutional arrangement and the interaction with the local and the global processes, many of the social realities of these collectivities are get redefined. Tribals are one of the important social collectivities in India. There are altogether 776 tribal communities in India. They altogether constitute roughly around 8% of our total population. The tribals are a distinctive social category with distinctive economic, social and political organizations and distinctive form of identity formation and their reflection in the wider and local societies. Today, we shall be discussing some of the important facets of the tribal societies with Professor Virginius Khakha among us. I, on behalf of Sociology faculty of Indira Gandhi National Open University, invite Professor Virginius Khakha in today's discussion, and welcome Professor Khakha in today's discussion, and we are thankful to you to come over here. Now, I like to begin with a very straight and simple question that there is a lot of talk about the tribes, the caste, etc. like this, lot of confusion about the concept of tribes, whether they would be called the indigenous community or a tribal community. Will you please clarify at the very outset, how do you conceptualize tribe and what are the differences between the tribes and caste in India?
Well, in order to conceptualize tribes, we have to go a little back in history. At a certain point of time, tribes were primarily seen as a group of people who have a common ancestry. But since the 17th and 18th century with European colonization, there is a very particular sense in which the whole idea of tribe began to evolve, and that idea was something to do with what we call the idea of primitiveness. And therefore, you find that primitiveness became one of the very important features of the understanding of tribes, let us say, in anthropological literature, and something which has really been carried over, let us say, in other social science literature. Now, when you come to India, the way in which the whole category of tribe that evolved is somewhat different than the way in which probably it came to be associated with colonization. Is in India, you find that when the British conquered different parts of India and also in a way incorporated the area which were inhabited by tribes, they found that these groups or collectivities which were living in the interiors of India were somewhat a different kind of people. And this is evident from the fact that they were introducing somewhat different kind of administrative structure. Now, this is somewhat a very what is called administrative way of understanding tribes, but sociologists and social anthropologists have tried to conceptualize tribes in somewhat different way, and they try to do it in a more coherent and systematic manner. You see, if you look at anthropological writings of tribes, then tribes were basically seen as very small groups of people with their own language, their own culture, their own territory, their own government, and therefore, whosoever has these kind of features will by and large being defined as tribes. Now, if you really take this as the way of defining tribes, then you do not really know as to how this group of people can be differentiated from the other kinds of groups or communities, because basically these are the divisional features of the society itself. It is in that context that you find that again sociologists or anthropologists began to refine the whole concept of tribe. And you find that it is here that tribes were primarily, although they may be a society, but they were being seen as a group of people who represent a particular stage of the development of human society, or they represent a particular social formations. And in the Indian context, this was primarily seen in the context of caste. By and large, if you look at the Indian society, you find that it was a caste society, and therefore the aspects of inequality, the aspects of social differentiation, aspects of division of labor, aspects of a religion which was codified. Now, these were some of the features which were characterizing feature of a caste society. It is against this that you find by and large the tribes have been what is called posited, and therefore tribes are primarily seen as a group of people who live, let's say, an egalitarian life, who are in terms of social characteristics characterized by homogeneity. There is a hardly social differentiations. It's primarily based on kinship, and you find that the whole aspects of hierarchy and exploitations and inequality is almost absent in tribal society. So it is so you find that the way in which we sociologists or social anthropologists have conceptualized tribe is somewhat a different way, in the sense in which this has come to be conceptualized or come to be identified in, let us say, political and administrative structure of the Indian society.
Yeah, thank you. Just a related one, that we are also having called denotified tribes, and also having this nomadic tribes. I mean, these are mostly technical, at times also politically defined. Do you like to make some reflection on it?
Well, you know, there are some groups of communities. Again, in order to understand the categories like denotified tribes or nomadic tribes, etc., I think it is important to go back again to the history. I think there were groups of communities who were earlier, in fact, making their living on movement, moving from one place to the other. And in the colonial period, in fact, the British began to identify some of these groups of communities who were constantly in move as criminal tribes. And for a long period of time, therefore, there were groups or categories of people who were known as criminal tribes. After India attained independence, this category of criminal tribes were therefore what you call that it was done away with. They were denotified. They were earlier notified as criminal tribes, those denotified. So in the process, they have come to be known as denotified tribes. Now, in the process of denotifying, actually, in a sense, you maintain the fact that there is a continuity with so-called criminal tribes, because they are very clearly separated from the other kinds of tribes, and that is primarily to do with certain kinds of activities which they were engaged in, because I think they did pose certain kinds of law and order problem for the British administrations, and therefore that is the way in which it is they were identified as the criminal tribes. Now, as far as the nomadic tribes is concerned, well, this category again has been important, is not very clear, because whether they are really tribes or non-tribes, but nevertheless they are the groups of people who have constantly move, and sometimes we also use the groups of people who are not territorially bound, but moving from one place to the other as something also a nomadic tribe, and that is the way in which probably one can try to see the category nomadic, denotified, which to my mind, or which I think even administrative parlance of Indian constitution is somewhat different than the category which is known as scheduled tribe.
Yeah, now, as emerges from this discussion, that tribes are not a homogeneous category, number one. Number two, that there is a diverse kind of concentration of the tribal population all over India. Now, against this backdrop, is it possible to make some kind of a common kind of a projection of the tribal reality of India in terms of their economic, political, social and cultural situation?
Well, it is a well established fact that tribes in India surely is not a homogeneous category. I think they are differentiated among themselves on the basis of number of criteria. In fact, if you take even the size of the populations, you may find a tribe which is just less than 100 souls, as against tribes like the Gonds or the Bhils, which may almost to the extent of 7 million, sorry, 70 lakhs or so. So you find on the size of the populations, on the basis of the fact of making the living modes of livelihood, or on the basis of the fact that what is the level of development that they stand, or even in terms of the extent to which they are acculturated or they are in contact with the larger society, you find that there are a lot of differences. And therefore, you find that sociologically it is extremely difficult to put all these groups of people who are different in terms of size, in terms of level of development, in terms of modes of making a living, in terms of the level of development, in terms of cultural contact, into under one social category. Now, nevertheless, you find that we have all been defining them as tribes, and I think this has to be understood not so much in terms of the homogeneity of the tribes, but in terms of the fact that they are, in contrast to the caste society, in contrast to the larger Indian society, they seem to be more homogeneous. As I said earlier, spelled out that in terms of relatively egalitarian social structure, relatively absence of hierarchy, a kinship based systems. In fact, most of all these tribes, in spite of the fact that they are a different level of development, it's primarily a kinship based system, a kinship based society. So, it is this which really brings some sort of homogeneity, and this is more to do with social, cultural or structural features, but also in terms of the contemporary social reality, you find that there is a certain kind of homogeneity. Particularly if one to some extent separates the Northeast India, which is in many sense different from some of the mainland India. If you look at the mainland India, you find that extent of poverty is highest among the tribal population in India. Level of literacy probably is the lowest. You find in terms of infant mortality or mortality below 5 years of 5, in fact, you find is highest among the tribals. In terms of access to the health facilities, in fact, you find that it is much more absent among the tribal societies. So, you do find that in terms of contemporary conditions of living, either in terms of economy or various indicators of economic development, you find that they by and large are the most marginalized and most deprived sections of the society, despite the fact that the territory in which they live is enormously rich in terms of resources, either forest or the mineral and other kinds of resources. And you find a lot of industrial development and mineral exploitations, in fact, has really been taking place. So, in spite of all that, you find that they seem to be one of the most marginalized sections of the Indian society. Northeast India or tribals from the Northeast India is somewhat relatively better off than the mainland India, which is again to my mind due to the fact that the kind of industrializations, kind of exploitations of the forests and the mines that we have seen in mainland India is conspicuously absent in Northeast India, because of the kind of protections which constitutions has really provided. And therefore, you find that in terms of the level of poverty, in terms of literacy, in terms of the health indicators, you find that Northeast Indian tribes in fact have done much better than the tribes of the mainland India.
Now, the tribes are located within the broader social processes in India, within the processes of economic development and whole process of modernization, westernization, and also contemporary processes of globalization. Would you please like to underline that how have the processes of globalization impacted on the lives and realities of the tribes in India?
Well, if you see from the point of view of the tribal communities in India, I would like to say that probably tribals began to face the process of globalizations ever since they became a part of the colonial rule. Because as we all know that tribals were segregated, or they lived a very closed life. They had a control over the land, they had control over the forest, they had control over the territory, they had a governance of their own. So, it was a kind of complete autonomous society. Now, with the coming of the colonial rule, you find that they really become a part of the larger colonial structure, and therefore, they become a part of the colonial state. They become a part of the colonial administrations. They become a part of the uniform civil law and administrations which was introduced by the colonial state. Now, these were some of the things which tribals were not really familiar with. Now, this coming of the state, becoming a part of the state, or becoming a part of the law and administrations which was grounded on the modern system or modern organization, it was something really alien to the tribals. At the same time, you find that along with these kinds of institutions of the state of which they really became part, there were also a process of what is known the institutions of private property, institutions of market which got penetrated into tribal areas. So, they really became a part of what you call the land market, they became really part of the labor market, they also became a part of the credit market. So, what you find, the process through which they really became a part of the modernization process was through the process of market, trade, commerce, and through the part of the political process, which was characterized, as I said, is basically a modernization process. Now, this had a devastating effect on the tribals, and all through the colonial rule, if you really look at, you find that the tribals steadily began to lose control over land. They began to lose control over the forest on which they had an easy access, and you find that they really become a part of the credit market, in the sense indebtedness became rampant, and through indebtedness you find they started losing again the control over the land. They became a part of the colonial political system, and therefore you find that tribal areas became a base or the place where recruiting labor for the plantations, particularly in Assam and in Bengal, where tea gardens were really coming up. So you find that as to how they really got caught up in the whole this process of the modernizations. Now, this did not really benefit them. As I said, being a part of the modernization process did not really bring any sort of benefit to the tribals, particularly in the colonial rule. But in the post-colonial rule, I think there was this effort to extend certain kinds of advantages or benefits of modernization as well. And therefore, you find that immediately India adopted constitutions. In fact, all kinds of protective measures were incorporated for the protections and the welfare of the tribal people. So, most of the constitutional measures, if you look at, either they were protective, they were a kind of mobilizing them, particularly in terms of affirmative actions programs. You had development measures, in the sense the state was supposed to take a special care for the development of the marginal sections of the society, which included the tribals. And therefore, you find that in the post-colonial period, you find it has been a process of modernizing, whereby there was an effort to bring the fruits of modernization to tribals as well. So, various kinds of development schemes have been there from the very beginning. Community development program, what is called intensive agriculture development programs, subsequently from tribal sub-plans and all that. So, enormous amount of money has been spent in order to improve the quality of life of the people. But somewhere I think there has been a problem, because despite all that, the benefits has not really accrued to the tribal people, and they remain sort of excluded. So, there was this process of inclusion, and yet this process of inclusion has kept them really excluded. And I look at it, this has to be seen as to why this is the case, is with the larger questions of the national development, the regional development in India. You find that we embarked on the path of national reconstruction process, and you find industrializations, large scale development projects, either it is to do with dams or hydraulic projects, etc., etc. In fact, by and large in the 50s and 60s all came up in tribal areas, because they were, as I told earlier, that they were really rich in resources. So, but this large scale development projects did not really benefit the tribal people, although it might have benefited the nations, it might have benefited the Indian state, it might have benefited the larger Indian community, but the benefit of that did not really go to the tribal. So, you find a sort of, so whereas there was from the very beginning, there was an effort to bring them in terms of development to the mainstream, and yet they really became a sort of excluded. And this, to my mind, is more to do with a kind of contradictions between what I call the tribal development and what I call the national development. I think there is a basic contradictions between the two. The national development has really been taking place at the cost of the tribal development. And if therefore one has to see that the development or fruits of development actually accrues to the tribals, probably one has to think a little more seriously as to what would be the pattern of development in the tribal areas. As far as
do you like to suggest this lack of political commitment towards this tribal development towards that end?
Well, I think several administrators and social scientists, they do talk about of the fact that there is a lack of commitment, but I think one has to really place this problem in a wider context. I think when we talk of tribal problem, I think everyone thinks that it is largely because of the lack of implementations, or there is no dedication to implementing the program. Programs are very well meaning and so on and so forth. And if you ask anyone and they say that, well, much of the problem is because the programs or the schemes are not really implemented. I think we have to really go beyond that. This, to my mind, this is more of a kind of excuse. I think as to why the programs are not really implemented, as I said earlier, has to be really situated in the wider context. And the wider context is the wider political context. By and large, wherever there is a development schemes, we all know the tribals really constitute a very small minority. Whether you take any, tribals are always situated in different states, and if you really look at the tribal population in different states, you find that they constitute in terms of population differently. For example, in Andhra it could be just maybe 6% or 5%, I don't exactly know the figure. In Bengal it's around 5%, Odisha maybe 22%, but wherever even 22%, where Odisha is supposed to be one of the state where the large chunk of tribal population live, and yet you find that that they are really minority. And I think given the fact that we are a democracy where one man one vote is so very important, and therefore the larger majority therefore have to have larger say. So in this process of the wider network, and therefore the benefits of development is really going to accrue to the wider community, and therefore you find that tribals really become vulnerable. And therefore in order to understand as to why the benefits is not really going to the tribals, it's not to do, I don't think we can really blame to the implementation. As to why there has been lack of implementation has to be really seen in the wider political process, where you find that tribals cannot really articulate their aspirations, they cannot really articulate demands, and even if the demands, given the kind of political structure we have, given the kind of democracy we have, probably tribals will find extremely difficult to have the share of benefits.
Just at this point, now if it is not the lack of political commitment, do you like to highlight something related to the whole process of formulating the tribal plan for the development?
Tribal issues has been an important area of concern. Let's say ever since India really became independent. In fact, this also became one of the important concerns. Let's say even preceding independence, there was a fierce debate between, we know, Aylwin and Gurye in terms of what would be the policy towards tribals in post-independent India. Now that is there, and I think rather than taking up the policy of assimilations, which Gurye in fact initially had articulated, and he eventually abandoned that policy and really came more to the closure of integrations. And so also you find Aylwin, who had earlier subscribed the policy of isolations, he also in fact began to move more towards the policy of integration. And therefore you find that there is surely a policy where we think, at least if you of course the policy of integrations is not, if you look at 50s and 60s, were not clearly stated. In fact, the whole policy of what is known as a tribal policy, nearly policy of integration, is actually found in the preface of a book in a philosophy for Nepal, where Jawaharlal Nehru wrote a foreword to the book, and that is where he has spelled out, and most of us have taken that as a kind of a tribal policy. Now I think to my mind, what tribal policy is actually inscribed in the Indian constitutions, and if you really take Indian constitutions, I think that is an embodiment of the tribal policy. And if you really explicate this, probably it is moving towards what is called the policy of integration and not towards an assimilation. But despite this, I think there has been a protectionist measures because of integrations, because there is a development measures. But somehow what has really happened is that the protections which Indian constitutions try to give for the tribals, that to some extent has been sidetracked at the cost of the development. So the development and protections, which were supposed to go simultaneously side by side, actually what happened, the development really became more important and the protection really became less important. And that's why you find that although there has been development, they have really become very, very vulnerable. And today, I think in terms of trying to work out a tribal policy, we want to look at all kinds of schemes, programs, etc., etc. But what is it, that kind of a policy that we are really looking for? Actually today you want to give more protections, but when tribals have almost lost control over what assets they had almost in the last 60 years, then trying to come back to what it was in the 50s and 60s is actually is not really helping them in any way. You might have a very well formulated, very well conceived and very pro tribal policy, and yet because of the kind of history that tribals have gone through in the last 60 years, probably things have really changed, and this policy actually is not leading you very far.
Professor Khaka, will you please very briefly as the tribal situation poses a lot of challenges both for the academics, the politicians, the policymakers, and so on. What have been the specific response of the sociologists in dealing with the problems of the tribes in India?
I think it is a very interesting that tribals were one of the groups or communities on which I think large body of social science literature has really come up. I think there is no other groups or communities which have been as extensively studied as the tribal community. And this is to do with the fact that there was an anthropological survey of India, government organizations which was supposed to do a lot of studies on tribes. Then you have in many of the states, particularly those states where there is a 5th schedule provision, there is a tribal research institute. And then you have university departments, anthropology departments in many of the universities in India, who were all supposed to engage themselves in the tribal studies. And I think you find that an enormous amount of material has come, but I am not really very sure whether this kind of materials which we have generated have really made difference to the lives of the tribal people. I am also not very sure whether the anthropological literature which has really come up actually had made any sort of a major theoretical or given a breakthrough to any sort of major theoretical understanding as far as the tribals in India are concerned. And so the problem I think is that as far as the tribals are concerned, other social scientists have almost in a way neglected the study of tribes. So it has really become a prerogative of the anthropologists, and anthropological understanding of tribes has not really moved beyond what they had been doing in the 50s and 60s. Now I think what is an important as a social scientist, I think it is an important for us that sociologists, historians, political scientists, economists actually engage themselves in the study of tribes, and that is really emerging today. For example, historians and political scientists have taken study of tribal communities in a very long, not really in a big way, but you find a number of historians and political scientists and economists who are got interested in the study of tribes as a result of, and they are really taking up the issues which are very critical to the tribals. For example, the question of displacement, question of democracy, the substantive democracy or the formal democracy, the marginalized citizens or formal what is called substantive citizens, etc., etc. So much of the critical issues which are being faced by the tribals in fact is really being taken up, and therefore today you find that because of the other social scientists engaging themselves into the tribal issues, probably you find tribals seem to getting a little more wider space in the social science literature than what it was, let us say 10 or 12 years back.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Khaka. In this discussion today, we have discussed widely the whole concept of the tribes, its location within the broader social and economic processes of this country. Also, we talked about the various limitations of the developmental perspectives and the response of the social scientists towards the issues of the tribes in India. I, on behalf of the sociology faculty, extend my heartiest thanks to Professor Khaka to spare some time to come over to the studio and giving a very fruitful talk for our students. Thank you very much for coming over. Thank you.